my sister and I have been really close, and thankfully our families have been close. And so she has 3 kids and I've got 2, and then we've got 11 grandkids between the 2 families. So, and we're almost all of us here. So we're only missing 2 people out of the 25. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. Here. So we're only missing 2 people out of the 25.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, there's an echo.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you all hearing an ongoing echo of our voices?
Not of yours or Shireen's, but of Mark's.
Echo.
Yeah.
Are you all hearing an ongoing echo of our voices?
Oh no, and now I'm hearing the echo of everybody. Not of yours or Shireen's, yeah, but of Mark's.
Echo.
It's a delayed echo.
Yes. Are you all hearing an ongoing echo of our voices? That's me again. You hear it?
Yeah.
It's like Groundhog Day.
Is that better?
It reminds me of my swearing in when I was chosen, because I had the link on and then was live, and it was like an audio delay, and it was so confusing. All right. I'll be right back. Did we lose Commissioner York? I thought I saw him dialing in.
He was on for a moment.
Yeah.
Commissioner Neal, I see you figured out the background.
I have. Just very exciting background I've chosen.
Where's Telluride? We want the mountains.
Absolutely.
There's Commissioner York with his background on.
Good morning, Doug.
I think I'm the only one without like a fake background.
Yeah.
I'll have to get with the program. Oh, but then again, I'm the independent, so.
Good morning.
Right. Good morning. We're waiting for Vice Chair Watchman, who we expect to join.
There you go, Erica. I didn't want you to feel left out. It's a simple background today. The door.
It's nice to have company.
So you can see it's delayed a little bit. I don't know if that's good or bad. That's funny. Come on. Talk to me. That's funny.
Are you
But then I'll-
frozen, Doug?
I think so. I think I am.
Yeah. Because that's an unusual background you have going on right now.
Yeah, it's side view. Plug in. Let's see what we can do here. Let's go back.
All right,
here.
and we're waiting for Vice Chair Watchman. We'll wait a couple more minutes, and otherwise we'll get started. The first few items are, pretty routine.
Right. Okay, dang it. There we go. Now we'll go back. Let's. I see my issue. No, I'm connected.
Brian, you want to maybe text Vice Chair Watchman just so we're, I don't want to hold off if there's something that is holding him up. So
Yes.
just want to make sure all's good, and thank you.
There we go. We're back.
Welcome back.
That's what happens without your background.
Yeah, I see that. Don't bend over and plug in the charger.
Okay, I'm going to suggest maybe we give it another minute, and if not, we'll dive in and hope that Vice Chair Watchman, can join us when he's able. We never know what kind of internet problems there are, and connectivity.
Power issues.
We're going to leave. Oh, there's Vice Chair Watchman. We're going to leave quite the informative journal to IRC 4.0,
Right.
so they can avoid all of. But technology in 10 years from now is going to be way different. So, good morning, Vice Chair Watchman. I believe
Good morning.
we have our full team here, and so we'll dive right in. Agenda item 1, call to order and roll call. 1A, call for quorum. It is 8:06 a.m. on Tuesday, July 27th, 2021. I call this meeting of the Independent Redistricting Commission to order. For the record, the Executive Assistant, Valerie Newman, will be taking roll. When your name is called, please indicate you are present. If you're unable to respond verbally, we ask that you please type your name. Val.
Vice Chair Watchman,
Present.
Commissioner Lerner,
Present.
Commissioner Meal,
Present.
Commissioner York,
Present.
Chairperson Newberg,
Present.
and for the record, we also have in attendance Executive Director Brian Schmidt, Deputy Director Lori Van Haren, Public Information Officer Michelle Crank. From our legal team, we've got Roy Herrera and Jillian Andrews from Ballard Spar, and it looks like we have Ryan Regula from Snell and Wilmer. Our mapping consultants, we've got Mark Flahan from Timmins, Doug Johnson and Ivy Beller-Sikansky from NDC Research, and our transcriptionist, Angela Miller. Thank you. That's all we have.
Thank you. And please note for the minutes that a quorum is present. Agenda item 1B, call for notice. Val, was the notice and agenda for the commission meeting properly posted 48 hours in advance of today's meeting?
Yes, it was, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2, approval of minutes from July 20th, 2021. We have 2A, the general session. We also have 2B, the executive session, which was reflective of agenda item number 10. Any discussion on the minutes? If there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve the general session and executive session minutes from July 20th, 2021.
A motion to approve the executive and general session minutes from July 21, 2001.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Further discussion? With that, we will do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York,
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. And with that, the general session and executive session minutes are approved. Thank you as always, Val, for your fantastic minutes. Agenda item number 3, opportunity for public comments. Public comment will now open for a minimum of 30 minutes and remain open until the adjournment of the meeting. Comments will only be accepted electronically in writing on the link provided in the notice and agenda for this public meeting and will be limited to 3,000 characters. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we will move to agenda item number 4, discussion on public comments received prior to today's meeting. I open it up to my colleagues if you have any thoughts or comments to share. Yeah, I think the silence is, there weren't that many public comments. And I think now that we've embarked on our listening tour, there's a shift and we're receiving tremendous feedback, which we will discuss in the next agenda item. But if there's no other further discussion, we can move to agenda item number 5, which is update from the mapping consultants, Timmins and DC. And prior to turning it over to our mapping team, I just like to say, you know, it's been an incredible honor and humbling, you know, to participate in the first few public hearings. They've been incredible with substantive feedback, decorum behavior. It's just clear that our public is thirsty for, you know, expressing themselves through these democratic means. And I just have to say that it's really been touching and exciting. And with that, please, I'm going to turn it over to the mapping folks to give us an update.
Well, good morning, everyone. I definitely echo Chairwoman Newberg's opinion on the listening tour. I think we've had great attendance and people have been very open of sharing their ideas with us. So that has been really good. I would like to share with you some stuff about the listening tour that I think as a commission, you guys will be interested in. Let me share my screen with you first. Can you guys see the screen right now? Because I lose you, I can't see you once.
Yes,
yeah.
we're giving you thumbs up, but if you can't see us, that doesn't help. Yes, we see it.
Perfect. So we've received 60 digital submissions so far in our community of interest survey that's online. You can see that they are all over the state, which is good. We're hoping to get more digital submissions coming in. We still have the paper submissions from the first 3 listening tours to process to put into the system. So there is more than 60 that we have received, and we'll process those shortly. But what you can see is there is a good cross-section of surveys that were turned in throughout the entire state. And what this viewer allows you to do is to not only zoom in all over the map. So we were in Phoenix. And you can see just in this general area of Phoenix, we have 38 submissions that have been turned in out of the total 60. And this viewer will allow you to go into a submission, click on it, and you can read the exact wording that was turned into you guys as the commission. And it's the same thing. Everything opens up or changes. So all the numbers changes as I pan around on the map. If you want to go to certain spots, we have zip codes in there. In the Tucson area, it looks like we've received about 19 so far. Also on this left side of the map under these numbers, you can see the individual ones that were submitted. And if you see one in this list that you want to see more information about, you can click on it. It will zoom to it and it will highlight it, as you can see the pink outline there. And then we could click on it to open it. And because there's so many put on top of each other, this one is Sarah Simmons, and here is what she wrote to you guys in the community of interest survey. So what we'd like to do with this dashboard is we want to make this public so the people can see the listening tour and the submissions that we have for the record. On the dashboard. So that was one item that we had from the listening tour that I think was really good, and that would allow you guys as a commission to also go through the comments yourselves and see it on your own time. Doug, did you want to add anything to that? I think that was a no.
Sorry, I'm muted. No, I'm good.
Okay. The other couple things I was hoping to go over for the listening tour, and I will reshare my screen. There's a couple questions about the survey. So just quickly wanted to go over it real quick again. So all they have to do is go to your website, irc.az.gov/survey, click either on the English or the Spanish version. It will open up the survey. And when you come in here, all you're going to have to do is put first name, last name, postal code, email address, and then are you submitting comments on part of an organization? Give us if you're attending a listening tour meeting, not required to attend a listening tour meeting. So if you are, please select one from the list. That way we can pull it up. Give it a community name, and then draw up a community boundary map. And the easiest way to do that is if you click here, it'll open the map up to full screen. And then you can click this button that looks like a square, but with the top sort of caved in a little bit. And now all you have to do is just click on your map to draw a community of interest. So it's very simple. And once you're done, click the X and you can see that it's submitted. Give us a description, additional comments, and hit submit. And you should be on your way, and it is submitted to us. And you will get another page to confirm that. The other thing that I'd like to go over real quick is there were some questions about the socioeconomic report. So the easiest way to use the socioeconomic report is to come over here to the bottom buttons once it loads. If you click on this bookmark, it'll open up all the counties that you could go to in alphabetical order. Pick the county that you're a part of. This example will use Greenlee County. Once you've selected that, click the X, click the demographic variable list, and this first I is exactly a description of all the different variables that are here. Once you find the variable that you want, say I want to do income, come over to the income one, which happens to be the dollar sign. If I hover over the icon, you can see it lists income variable. Click that, turn it on, and we can see here is the income variable for Greenlee County. If you want to pan the map, you can either click and hold and drag it, or you can use the plus and minus buttons over here to zoom in and zoom out. Once you find a census block that you're interested in, click on it, and it'll give you the exact pop-up of the data. The one thing I will say is when you start out at the state, you need to zoom into your county first to see the data.
Mark, can I ask a question about, is there a key that tells us what green and yellow and blue mean?
Yes, there is. If you click the legend button down here, oops, not left click, there we go. Here is the key. So it's basically a percentage of income over 75,000. So it's not going to break it down into like over 150,000, under 50,000. It's just going to give you the key of the percentage of households that have income, annual household income above 75,000.
Thank you.
I'm presuming, Mark and Doug, that top dollar amount is based on, you know, your understanding of collecting data, that it's not arbitrary, but in terms of us understanding socioeconomic status, there's a reason why it stops at that mark.
So yeah, I can address that. So yes, the Census Bureau actually breaks down the responses into 4 or 5 income categories. So it's kind of a middle class breakdown there. There's only like those 3 or 4 points that we can choose from.
Okay. Thank you.
And then if you'd like to use other variables, voting age, population variable, you can turn on that. First one listed here is the Latino. And we can see what that looks like on the map. And same thing, Commissioner, when you want to look at the legend, you click on the legend. If you want to leave open all these boxes, you're more than welcome to. If you see ones that you don't want, so you don't need the about anymore because you're already familiar with the app, click the X, close it. If you're done with the income variable, click the X, close it. If you want to move these things out of the way, you're more than welcome to. Just click the top bar and drag, and you can move it wherever you want, and it will dock itself. But I think it's very easy to use. Are there any other questions on this?
Mark, how do you see us using this data at this point? What is the most important thing we would be looking at if we start playing around with this?
What this data really gives you is it gives you the demographics to start to look for connections, especially when you're looking at community of interest. So it'll allow somebody to go in and say we're at Dewey Humboldt right now, which is just outside the Prescott area where we're going today. And we are looking at the Latino citizen voting age population, and we could start to make correlations of where our community of interest is because this is showing everything down to the census block. We could also use other variables as in education if we wanted to, so we could see the difference in education. We wanted to look at multifamily housing. It's all about how we can connect the dots to show communities of interest.
Yeah, and Mark, let me just add to that a little bit too. It's not so much about the commission and our side trying to make these communities of interest. It's more for the residents to use. So if they want to come in and define their neighborhood as a heavily Spanish-speaking area or an area that shares other characteristics, they can use these maps to define exactly what area shares those characteristics that they identify with.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions on the social economic report? Okay. The last piece that I wanted to mention for the listening tour is that if they submit a listening tour survey for a community of interest before the meeting, and then they attend one of your public meetings on the listening tour, we are actually able to grab your community of interest survey, put it up on the screen. So now we're talking about the exact area that you want to talk about for a community of interest. And that makes sure that we're seeing exactly what you wanted to submit us. And I think it makes it a lot easier when they're giving public testimony, so you can see their exact area. So I'd encourage the public to go fill out the community of interest survey before the meetings. That way we can pull it up on the screen when or if you come in and give public testimony. That's all I got for the listening tour. Doug, do you have any comments on the listening tour?
Nope.
I have a question, but I want to compartmentalize. You're speaking mostly about method of collecting data. I have a question that speaks to our ability to collect data. And so you let me know when the right time to ask that question is. Is it now or later in your presentation?
If you'd like to ask it now, we'll be more than happy. I don't know the exact question, so I don't know if it would fit better in the end or now.
Let me tell you what's on my mind, and you tell us when we should dive into this conversation. As I mentioned before, and I think collectively we all agree, the listening tours, I mean, it's been incredible. One thing that really stuck out to me is how few legislative districts were represented, you know, in these major hubs that we had a listening tour. You know, most of the time we were hearing about maybe 2, 3, you know, prime legislative districts. And so my concern is all of that data that we're not collecting, all the people we're not hearing from. So for example, people that are remarkably satisfied with their districts, they're probably not showing up. And so we're giving such a premium on these surveys and the public sharing the data with us. Do we need to do more proactive work with soliciting information from people like county supervisors, superintendents of schools, city council members? I guess what I'm asking is, and it's to you and our broader staff, are we collecting the cross-representation of data that we need? And is there anything that we can do to make sure that the feedback we're hearing is really cross-sectional? If that makes sense. And you're welcome to answer it whenever it fits into your item.
I think the tough thing, and I'll probably pass it over to Doug in just a second, is that it's hard to solicit public input when you can't get public input from them, or when they're not turning it in. Doug, you want to?
Yeah, you know, this is always a challenge. I will share the attendance at the listening tour meetings has been much higher than I anticipated it being. So definitely the word is getting out. But as you noted, you know, the word gets out both from the commission directly and from people who spread the word themselves. And so in certain circles, you're obviously getting the word spread better than in others. But I think it's always hard to say, you know, more outreach, of course, is always good. Is it a return on investment? That's the question to ask about. At some point, you reach rapidly diminishing returns, but it would be great to get more input. That's universally true. It will always be great to get more input. So whatever can be done to help that is certainly be great. But if an area is not coming out now, like I say, it's probably because they're happy with the map. The grid, I mean, grid map is kind of designed to take care of that.
Okay.
And will likely fire more people up to weigh in. But this is the universal challenge of all outreach efforts: is more would always be more. I think certainly appreciate what you're getting so far. And if we can get other corners in, great. In terms of like needing to hear from cities or counties, those are kind of to some degree, they're in the criteria on their own. So, just because we're not hearing from a community doesn't mean that the commissioners aren't aware of it and aren't going to take it into account as you're drawing maps.
Thank you for that. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that there will be a wealth of data that will represent those who are not necessarily coming forth for whatever reason. They're happy, they're, distracted, they have other higher concerns. That's really my concern, is collecting accurate data.
Actually, unless there's more comments on that question, I think your question is actually going to tie into the next part of what I have. Another comment that came up in the listening tour was the use of possibly using a rubric to grade and look at maps, and a gentleman came up with that. Doug, you wanna talk about rubric?
So, I think we can come back with a more in-depth discussion later on too on this if there's that level of commission interest. This question comes up a lot in redistricting reform discussions. Wouldn't it be really nice if we can just plug the formula into the computer and the computer generates the best map? The challenge is whoever gets to write that formula and whoever gets to assign those weights controls the map. And of course, coming up with those individual measurements is a huge challenge as well. We've talked a little bit about competitiveness and how to measure and identify that. We can have similar discussions about compactness, questions about how do you count and weigh community of interest splits. So there's a lot of value certainly to picking out what measures you're going to focus on for each of those criteria. And that certainly is part of the plan, is to figure out how we're going to measure competitiveness. What reports do you want on community of interest splits, following city and county lines, all the criteria that are in the Constitution. The bigger issue is with then trying to weigh each of those factors in a formula and program that into a computer, because that really does tend to take away discretion, and put you at the mercy of the computer. So it's discussed a lot. We can certainly, if there is interest, we can certainly come back with more details and more in-depth discussion of that. In particular, one nice thing that I can refer you to and bring you more info on if you want is in 2018, Missouri voters actually approved a ballot measure that sets up a rubric very clearly and has prioritized criteria that follow this formula of what they have to look at. It's a good example. It also, if it was implemented as written, it would require non-contiguous districts because they put a mathematical formula before contiguity. We won't know how that plays out because the voters approved that in 2018 and then reversed it in 2020. So that rubric is not actually being used by the state, but it is an example of kind of the challenges and the promises and the perils of a full-blown rubric approach. So I can stop there and see, if there is more interest, we can come back with more details about, what would be involved and the advantages and disadvantages of it. I didn't know how in-depth the commission wanted to get on this topic.
And just Commissioner Lerner, before for the public's sake, for those who weren't on our tour, one of the comments was suggesting that we come up with a rubric that allocates weights for the different constitutional criteria and essentially come up with a more empirically based way of doing the redistricting. And so that's the heart of what this conversation is. Commissioner Lerner.
Thank you, Chair Newberg. I'm actually really interested in this because I use rubrics a lot in my work. And I know that we have these constitutional criteria. The way it's written, they're basically pretty equal. So I do understand what you're saying about throwing it into a computer, but I actually hadn't been thinking it from that perspective as much as a commissioner perspective, saying if we as a commission could agree, even if it's dividing the 6 evenly, because really our Constitution doesn't weight them. It really doesn't make one higher than another. It tells us that we're supposed to consider all 6. If we were able to have that ourselves even, it might help us as we're evaluating all of these maps that we're going to be looking at. So we could put it into a computer modeling system, but rather than be completely subjective of saying, I like this map over that one, I would be interested in seeing if there is a way for us to have something that we create and the commission could kind of decide on how we, just like we do when we evaluate things, we have to look at some criteria. That's just my perspective. It helps me when I use a rubric to make sure that I'm not letting my biases or subjectivity influence what I'm looking at. And that's why I was particularly intrigued by that comment by that individual.
This is Commissioner Meal. I would have a slightly different take. I think the reports that we're talking about, where we get a report really on each of the different factors and deals with how any given map performs for that factor, is really important for us to be seeing. But to then do a formula, a true rubric formula, I would really not be comfortable with. But I think seeing evaluations, which I know that's a lot of what we've been talking about, of each of the different factors, is really important for us.
And I understand. My concern about the evaluations is how are those evaluations being done and who's making those evaluations and how are we judging whether those evaluations are, those are also computer generated in many ways. So it kind of goes to the same, and I'm not going to harp on this, but it's just, I feel that it could give us another way of objectivity, because even the evaluations, if they're going to be computer generated, we're kind of relying on that, and we're relying on whoever put those into the computer again to tell us how those are working. So it gives me that same concern.
Yeah, just for one note of clarification, I know the commissioners all know this, but in terms of the criteria, Commissioner Lerner, you mentioned they're not prioritized and they kind of balance them all. I did, just so there's a clear record, if people have not read them and are tuning in today, the competitiveness criterion does say it should be favored as long as there's no significant detriment to the other criteria. So
correct, yeah.
I thought quite a bit about this topic since it was raised, but before I share more of my thoughts, I really would like to hear from the other commissioners if you have ideas or reactions to this idea.
This is Commissioner York. I thought the idea was clever. When he presented it, he didn't talk about his community of interest. He just talked about the thought of a rubric. I believe the data comes from the Census Bureau, so it's pretty generic as far as influencing the different criteria as it relates to the Constitution. I'm more in favor probably of evaluating each issue as it's stated in the Constitution by the maps before we go into sort of a generic ranking. So I would support Commissioner Meal's ideas.
This is Vice Chair Watchman. As I think about it, I think we need some form of reality check to make sure that we're consistent with the Constitution. And so I was intrigued by the rubric example, and it kind of took me back to my calculus classes. And so and in many cases that's the basis for a lot of financial decisions. And so I think we do need some sort of checkpoint But, in reality, it's going to take a lot of work to get into, to each map once we get there. And so I like the concept as only as a reference point to make sure that we're consistent, and that we do need to make sure that we have 6 points, and to what degree have we achieved reaching the Constitution. And so a mathematical formula is probably one way to do that. And I guess that's probably my thoughts at this point as I think through it.
I agree that it's aspirational. As much as we could make this empirical, I think it would be comforting. I'm not sure that the people in the courts really wanted it to be so empirical. If it was, I think we would be given, stronger orders about that hierarchy. I'm also, a couple of things I'm concerned about. One, I'm concerned about layers. I mean, we'd be introducing a brand new way of doing things that would both require significant study, time, and then even potential legal challenges, because our deciding on that rubric, how do we determine that? I also think that what we're doing is a science, but it's also an art. And things that remove our ability to negotiate, work together, and understand things from a holistic perspective, that concerns me a little bit. So I guess my synthesis of this is, are there ways that we could each as an individual commissioner hold ourselves accountable to trying to interpret the data as empirically as possible, but not tying our hands such that we can, embrace this challenge, as I believe the public and the courts have asked us to do, which is using some discretion of our judgment. So I don't want to, handcuff our commission. I think it's aspirational. I think it's informative. But personally, I feel that it would be a huge risk, actually, to go that route.
I might suggest that we come back sort of to this topic at the next meeting or a future meeting when we get on the agenda, and talk about kind of the measures that we can give and provide about each of the criteria in the list. And then, we can add on top of that a discussion of, then could you put it into a rubric that would balance those 6 against each other? Because those are 2 kind of different topics, obviously. I think as Commissioner mentioned, obviously we want to measure each of the criteria as well as we can and give you as much data as we can on those individual criteria. And then I think that'll make kind of clear the difficulty of weighing the measures for criteria 1 versus the measures for criteria 2, kind of thing. If that would be something you'd find useful.
I would find that helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, what I heard from the hearings was that the last commission, in the public's opinion, overemphasized and put weight on one factor and left the other 5 by the wayside, so to speak. And so I think, not saying a rubric approach would be the best answer, but in my opinion, we need to give equal weight to all 6 factors. And so, so to try to be consistent with the Constitution. And, what the public told us was that the last commission, focused on 1 and not the other 5. And so I think keeping consistent with the Constitution is the approach that we as the new commission should keep in mind. So, good comment from the public. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Madam Chair, if I may, this is Roy. If it is the commission's desire to further consider this rubric kind of idea with Doug to come back and present options there, I think it would be a good idea for the legal team to also present to the commission as to the legal risk, if any, with the use of this kind of, rubric approach for weighing the constitutional factors. So we will be ready to do that at a future agenda date if that's what the commission desires.
I would appreciate that because I do have legal concerns. I mean, this is innovative, new, and I would like to remind all of us that we're also under a compressed time frame with the late census data release. And so we need to consider all of that. I'd appreciate that.
And I would just, I'm interested in what Doug has suggested, kind of coming back to us. Before we delve too far into the rubric, it would be interesting to see what information you had. My entire concern is on us trying to do as much objectively as we can, to the best that we can. So maybe a rubric isn't the best way, maybe there's other alternatives, but I just liked that concept, that's all.
And I'd like to just emphasize, Commissioner Lerner, we're all learning and working together. So all of this is impacting us. And so whether or not we formally adopt a certain procedure doesn't mean that we're not, being affected by the conversation to be as empirical and as objective as we possibly can without losing the freedoms that we have as commissioners.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you.
Additional, mapping may have additional information to share. So please take over.
Oh, you're muted, Mark.
That is the comment of 2020 and 2021. You're on mute. I think that was really it to wrap up the listening tour side of the house. From an update on that, I know we will be up in Prescott tonight at 5 p.m. We'll be there with you, and this tonight sort of embarks on the next, is it 6 listening tours before we get a break? So we're definitely looking forward to that. We'll be on the road with you every step of the way going forward. I think the next topic is we have on the agenda for the mapping team is the grid maps and the progression. And I will kick that over to Doug to sort of talk about the grid maps and the progression.
Yeah, so as I understand it, there's been kind of requests for clarifying exactly how does the grid map work and get picked, and then how do we move on to the draft map and ultimately the final map. So I can briefly touch on each of those stages of the process, and then obviously clarify as requested. One thing that's, I think, unique to Arizona is this beginning with the grid map. And really the clear goal of the folks that wrote the initiative and put that in is to really wipe out the current map as a reference. Obviously at the time they were writing this, the current map had been actually court imposed via the traditional legislative process during the 90s. And so it really cleared the table and said, we're starting from scratch. And so each decade, the beginning with the grid map really does that. It just wipes out the current legislative map and wipes out the current congressional map as a baseline. And as we've touched on a little bit, there are different ways to draw it, but they're all similar in that it's purely equal population in each district in a grid-like manner. And actually what the past commissions have ended up doing is using whole census tracts, which is another criteria. And there are various ways that this is done. The method isn't all that vital to the process as much as just that you get a nearly random map. Now it does say grid-like manner, But keep in mind, we do have to have equal population. So it's not going to be equal squares on the whole state because, as you know well, the population density varies so greatly across the state. But it is really highly compact districts that ignore essentially all the other criteria. We're not looking at cities. We're not looking at tribal reservations. We're not looking at the Voting Rights Act. We're not looking at competitiveness. All those factors come in later. The grid is just highly compact, population balanced districts. And it really is, obviously, it's not going to comply with the Voting Rights Act. It's going to have lots of problems and issues. It'll split through cities. It's a useful starting point, but it's a starting point that it's a bit of a mess, obviously, by design. And then, so that really gets chosen. There's typically not a lot of debate about it because it is supposed to be a semi-automatic or automatically generated map. It's just a map that you choose the method of drawing it, use that method at a very, very simple level. I suppose it could be called a rubric to some degree, but a rubric with only like 2 factors in it. So it is really a very simply adopted map, and all it's really doing is wiping out that history of the past map so that everyone's proceeding from the same starting point of essentially a blank map that has these grids on it. So that map gets kind of drawn and adopted, in about a day. It's very quick once you've chosen the method you want to use to draw it. Then what comes back, hopefully, and almost certainly, is a ton of feedback, a ton of public input on what a mess the grid map is likely to be and how people want to see it fixed. Cities will want to be put together. Obviously the tribal areas will want to be put together. Communities of interest want to be put together. All the obvious things that are spelled out in the Constitution as considerations you'll need to work through and get public input on and give direction and look at maps on as we try to, for the first time, balance all of the criteria and follow all the constitutional directions. So that takes place, as the commission has touched on a little bit. You could hear from the public through another listening tour. You could just hold weekly hearings, without traveling around the state. The main thing is being open to the public and hearing from the public. And I do really want to emphasize, especially for the public that followed this closely 10 years ago, this is a new era with the technology tools that are out there. This is not only have your voice heard at a hearing process. This is the tools will be up 24/7. People can weigh in, draw their communities that they want united, or draw a whole map. It's handy if they tell us, hey, the grid map is horrible for my community here, please put it together. It's even better if they say the grid map is horrible for my community, here's a map that fixes it. And actually submit plans that try to balance the criteria and give those to you for ideas for you to evaluate. So hopefully we'll get a ton of input, and then in a series of very intense, very packed together meetings, the commission is going to work its way, through starting from the grid map, through all that public input, and through your own judgment on the constitutional criteria, making adjustments to the grid, tying those adjustments to the constitutional criteria so we have a clear record of why each adjustment is made. And it's likely there will be, just going off the past commission's experiences, it's likely there will be some tests on the side. You'll ask what happens if we do this, and Timmons and NDC will run those maps and come back and show you that. And if you like it, well, then the commission can vote to incorporate that into kind of our master map. The key is that every change in that master map has to be explained as addressing one or more of the constitutional criteria. And then come up with a draft map, vote on that, and then that goes back out for another round. You know, it's inevitable that there will be difficult choices, that there will be in all likelihood, multiple places where you have to decide, we can either put this community together or this community together, and you have to make a choice one way or the other. And so you'll make that first round in those calls on the draft map, and then hear from the public again. And that really is a second round for the public, hopefully, to really dig in on the maps. Because once you're close to a decision with your draft map, you know, it's a lot easier for the public to make modifications to that draft map and submit them to you than it is for the public to start from scratch or to start from a grid and have to draw a whole state map. So if they have a problem with, say, how one legislative district is drawn, it's easy for them to redraw that one and maybe two bordering ones within your draft map than it is for them to start from the grid and try to draw the whole map up. So both of these rounds are very useful times to listen to the public. The first one, you'll have discussions that are all over the place. You know, everyone will take a different approach to this somewhat random grid map and come at it from a different angle. And then in the second round, it's much more focused. Everyone's kind of working from your draft map, trying to implement changes that they like in that draft map. And throughout all this, you've got to balance all those criteria in every decision you make and trade off, you know, one community versus another. You know, what is favoring competition versus what's a significant detriment to another criteria. You know, all those choices are challenges for you as you go through it. But that's really the phases. Is first a quick grid that is really nearly automatic. Hear back from the public. A series of, it's unlikely you'd get a draft map drawn in a day. So a series of multiple meetings where you're making choices and the draft map is developing with each of your choices until you adopt it. And then another phase where you hear from the public, and then come back for your final rush to the end of meetings and decisions. One question that always comes up, and I do want to emphasize for the public, is some folks look at the draft map and you may have gone against what they wanted in terms of, for example, if two communities have to be split, or which one do you end up splitting. But the draft map is definitely not the final map. If anyone looks at the last two commissions, there's a lot of change from that draft map to the final map. So folks should feel free. Just because they didn't get their way in the draft map doesn't mean that some other decision elsewhere in the map that as you make it final doesn't trigger the opportunity to achieve what they want as well. It can be, one term you'll hear a lot through this process as a final thought is rippling. Every change you make in the map has a tendency to ripple through at least the neighboring districts and often all the way across the map. It's certainly possible that what you decide to do in, say, the Marana Saddlebrook area could very easily impact the Litchfield Avondale district. You know, these things ripple as you make choices and they go through. So if someone didn't get what they wanted in the Litchfield Avondale area, well, maybe a later decision you make in the Marana Saddlebrook does make their Litchfield Avondale request possible. So hopefully folks will engage and stay engaged throughout this process. So hopefully that's useful as kind of a walk through the process and what happens at each stage. The key thing for folks to remember is that, number one, the grid wipes out the current districts as a baseline, and the grid becomes your baseline that you work from. And the grid is not, there are not a lot of choices involved. And the evaluation of the grid options, where all the choices and the judgment comes in, is getting to that draft and then getting to that final version.
This is Commissioner Meal. Doug, do you actually just present one grid map, or do you present a couple of possible grid maps to us?
It can go either way. It was funny that for the first commission, actually, before they met on the grid, the Arizona Republic had a little fun, and they drew and published in the paper like 16 grid maps, and some of them were just, you know, horizontal stripes across the whole state and vertical stripes across the whole state. So we can run maps that are different versions and show them to you. And then you can choose one, but then you're already starting to make choices and evaluate maps at a stage in which you're not really supposed to be evaluating maps. You know, the natural instinct is to, well, I'm going to choose this grid because it splits fewer cities. Well, that's not really what you're supposed to be evaluating the grid based on. So our suggestion and our proposal has been, why don't we'll come to you with the options for how it could be drawn, and just pick the method, and then we'll just generate it and just show you that map, rather than you starting to weigh in on, because how would you pick between one map versus another? You're starting to get into draft map decisions at that point. But that's just our suggestion. It's not, that method is certainly not a requirement.
This is Commissioner Lerner. I would be I understand what you're saying. We do not want 16 for sure. But I would be curious, because I know there's some different ways. One is that I've heard, one of the ways is to start in the dense areas, high population centers, and then work your way out. And another is to pick a corner of the state, whichever corner you want, and do that. That would be kind of interesting to me, just for us to see 2 or 3 options. Things that you've done in the past, perhaps, that you feel might be useful for us to see, I think would be helpful. And then you could provide your input on here's a couple of options, and here's what we think, why we think this one might work a little better. But I know from my perspective, having 2 or 3 with your perspective on that would be helpful.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, one of the things we need to come back to is we have talked about before how the last 2 commissions looked at their options for, as you say, picking a spot to start, and then do you go clockwise or counterclockwise. There's also some new capabilities in the software for kind of randomizing district maps. We don't have those nailed down to report to you today, but we've been working with the software vendors to get good descriptions of those. So we'll come back to you in hopefully next week, actually, with here are your choices and which ones of these methods do you want to see. And we have been thinking of it as which one of these do you want to use, but it could certainly be which ones of these do you want to see. And shoot, you could always look at 5 or 6 and then, roll a die to see which one you pick, kind of thing, if you wanted to do that. But yeah, I don't see a problem with showing you multiple versions. Mm-hmm.
And just for the commissioners and the public, could you kind of go through the timeline of when we'll be going through the process?
I do not have that in front of me. I don't know, Mark, if you have that handy, or Brian, if you do. I think. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay. So what we're looking at is looking at what methods of drawing the grid do you want to do in August. But the system won't be up and running, and obviously we won't have the data until mid-August, and then there's implementation time. So our schedule is for grid map to be adopted September 14th. And then the draft maps to be adopted at the end of October 22nd to 27th is the timeline we're looking at for that. So grid maps September 14th, draft maps essentially by the end of October, and then hopefully, kind of, I think we described it as aspirationally, final map by December 17th.
My most important takeaway from all of this conversation, to be honest, is we're starting all over per the Constitution. Regardless of which specific grid map we use may be somewhat arbitrary, because that's when we submit the data. You may not want to overthink something that's simplistic, but we're starting over, and submit your data. so that once we get the grid map, we can adjust it.
Mhm. Yes, and it's one thing, actually, Mark and I mean, I keep commenting after each of the listening tour meetings, is people very understandably think legislatively and congressionally about their current districts, but just for the public to take away that the current districts get wiped out. And obviously the population numbers in the state now may not have grown as much as people thought they'd grown according to the census, but certainly have grown a lot. So there will be very different numbers now than there were 10 years ago.
And I really appreciate you, Doug, emphasizing that, because with our state still having the same number of congressional districts, same number of legislative districts, it's important for the public to understand that we literally do start from scratch.
Yep.
This is Commissioner Meal. We had talked at our last meeting about when we do another actual listening tour similar to what we're doing now, and do we do 3 rounds or 2 rounds? And I think the last 2 commissions did 2 rounds of listening tours, and they just did, in our case, we'd be doing electronic feedback on the grid map, but then doing another round of listening tours after we do the draft maps. And I would encourage that rather than a 3rd round of a listening tour when you're just working from the grid map, and I don't think it's going to be that productive to do that. So. And Doug,
I agree with Commissioner. I agree with you, Commissioner Meal. I was thinking too, as well, but I'd be curious to know what Doug and Mark think as well. And that may have been your question when I caught
yeah,
it.
that was
Sorry.
my question. Was what do you experts think on that? So.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that the key thing is that you're open and listening to the public and holding meetings where the public can weigh in. Those could be as you travel around, or it could be just your regular meetings that people can, participate in and share their thoughts, and that you can look at their thoughts from the 24/7 availability of public comment. So the listening tours are, Brian is looking remarkably awake, given how much work he's had to put into getting these listening tour logistics done. They are an enormous amount of time and effort to put together. And one thing that we made as a mapping team we put together and made clear is you won't be able to do a listening tour like this one, where you're meeting every day or even every other day, just because at that stage there's so much more data coming in and so much more maps being processed that we just logistically can't handle a meeting a day. It'd be more like 1 or 2 a week, whether you do them as just regular commission meetings or whether you do them as a listening tour. Either would work. Obviously residents like it when you come around, but it would certainly be very practical and functional to just hold public hearings as well.
So conceivably, we could, where there was this idea of a listening tour for the grid maps that may or may not be, we could potentially just create a few meetings like this to get input, in addition to having people send in. But if we wanted to open it up to having people speak, potentially we could do it this way, rather than going around the state for that piece, and then do our listening tour for the actual responses to the maps, the draft maps, right? So if we wanted to, I'm not saying, I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm just throwing that out, that we could do it virtually as well.
Yes, it's certainly possible.
Commissioner Newberg, you're muted.
Sorry. That's the catchphrase for 2021 and 2020. You're muted. I just want to say, in terms of further discussion on 2, 3 listening tours, anything else that the commissioners want to chime in about, we don't have to make a decision today. I want to remind the public and our commissioners that we're open to feedback 24/7. So all of this conversation, you don't need to wait until these events happen to chime in with what your needs are. But any other conversation, because we've delved into agenda item 5C, which is discussion of 2 or 3 listening tours, opening it up to all substance to our mapping team.
Yeah, Joe Newberg, just before you move on that, I would say, I assume hopefully the public will hear this conversation and weigh in on that question. I'm guessing the commission probably needs to decide, if not at its next meeting, then certainly by the one after that, whether it wants to do a listening tour where you travel the state between the grid and the draft map, just because of the logistics involved. We need time to get this set up if you do want to travel. So just so the public knows that they should share their thoughts on this question, hopefully by the next meeting, and certainly the one after that would be the last chance for the commission to decide one way or another.
Absolutely. The staff needs advance direction. That this is a tremendous amount of work that goes into the listening tour. So,
I did have a couple more comments on the
Please.
sort of the grid map progression, and hopefully we can go back if that's allowed. We do need to schedule, start looking at training for the commission on the redistricting system. And that goes into all about grid maps and draft maps. You know, we had some couple comments about training, so we can make sure that the training is tailored to exactly what your needs are. So I think Doug was going to lead us a tiny bit on that aspect.
Yeah, we wanted to come back to this question of the level of commissioner access to the mapping system, really, and should the commissioners, do you wish to be actually drawing maps and putting them into the discussion, which obviously the public will be able to do, or do you want to be more limited? We can set the system up so that you can look at and review the evaluations of every map, but not actually create new maps yourselves. And that kind of keeps the commissioners a step removed and more of a judge role than a mapper role in the process. As a little background, the first commission took the judge evaluator role. The second commission took a more hands-on mapping role. So both approaches have been done. Our suggestion would be to take more of the evaluator and judge role and not be drawing maps yourselves. It has some possible legal advantages for you that legal can brief you on separately. It also kind of makes it less personal. We have run into projects, not at the state level, but we've run into city projects where it became, you know, Commissioner X's map versus Commissioner Y's map, and it became, you know, almost a popularity contest rather than which map was better. So wanted to return to that. Happy to share any more information other than what we shared at the last, when we first put this on your radar. But would love direction from you if you're ready to give that direction on what role you play in the system. And obviously the reason Mark's bringing him now is it plays into what training you get as commissioners. And just to reinforce, the plan is for the public to be able to fully draw maps. So we'll obviously be putting the other training on the whole system of mapping for the public to access and learn from.
But before we dive into this conversation, I'd like to ask a question of our legal counsel. So in terms of a conversation about, you know, this topic, it's not explicitly identified in the agenda. And I just want to make sure whether this is something that we can continue to have debate on, or whether or not this is something that we should defer to a future agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe since we are talking about the progression of the map drawing after grid map adoption and the training surrounding that, that we can still talk about it under subcategory B in item 5.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I just wanted that clarification. And with that, commissioners and Doug and Mark, please continue.
Yeah, so what it really boils down to is the question of when we set up the commissioner's access to the system, should we set it up so that you can actually draw maps, or just set it up so that you can see, review, and evaluate the maps that are submitted? And I would note that if you are in just the evaluation role, of course, you can still give direction in public meetings to where you'd say to Timmons NDC, can you draw a map that does X, Y, and Z? And obviously the decisions will always be yours as to what's happening. It's more just a question of, can you actually do them yourselves in the system on your own, or does all that have to take place via public direction to your mapping team? So with that,
this is Commissioner Lerner. So I think overall we're going to want to be more of the evaluators, but I would like to have the training because I would like to, if I feel like it, I'd like to be able to look at a map and say, I'm curious about this, not so much because I'm going to automatically want to submit and say, pick my map. That's not my intention, but I do want to be able to get a feel for partly what the public is doing as well. And I think that will help us to kind of see what's going on. So from my perspective, I'd like to be able to play with it and be trained on how to play with the data. Again, not so much because I'm going to want to select a particular map that I put in, but I think once you dig a little bit into the data, you have a better way of looking at what's being submitted as well. So I would like the training to include that option, where I could actually learn how to use the data in that way. It'll help me understand the maps better.
I tend to agree with Shireen on that, and I think I would encourage us to not submit our own maps, but to give verbal direction on things that we think are important. But having the ability to play with it behind the scenes, I think would be interesting and helpful. But I take the warning seriously that we don't want to individualize maps and have my map versus and so I would encourage us not actually to be submitting our own maps, but simply to be submitting our comments to the professionals to have them make changes to maps.
And I agree, Commissioner Neal.
This is Vice Chair Watchman. I agree also with Commissioner Lerner in that, we should be the evaluator, but I would also like to understand how the system works so that I get a feel for what the public is doing. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, we have a whole team doing the work for us, and then we'll evaluate, and we as a commission will decide, what best to move forward and improve.
Yeah, I think I saw Commissioner York give a thumbs up, and I'm going to chime in myself. I mean, yes, it might be fun to play with some maps as an individual citizen behind the scenes, but personally, my involvement officially on the commission, I would like my input to all be done in public.
Okay. Sounds good.
Anything else, mapping team?
Well,
you have the floor.
Chair Newberg, can we get clarification on what kind of training then? Are you going to give us the training on how also we can produce, how to use the mapping system as well? Is that I just want to make sure I'm clear on what we requested.
So I would say, and Mark can follow up on this, is that, obviously we're going to do training on the mapping system in the full range, because the public needs that, certainly. And you're certainly, we'll look at scheduling and figure out how that makes sense to do, whether we do it during one of your formal meetings or schedule a separate training time. Part of that will involve how long is the training. So you're certainly part of that training session. And then one thing we've talked with Mark about, and he may, I don't know if we have guidance from Esri on this yet or not, is if there's more intensive kind of what are the evaluation tools that are built in the system training. That may be a separate training session or part of the original one. But yes, you'll certainly be involved in the training system, involved in the training, and that'll be open to everybody.
Yeah, I think you gave us enough detail that now I can go and get, sort of put together the options in the agenda for that, and can provide you guys more detail on what that looks like at a future meeting. But that was the starting gate that I needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Did Doug's comment and mine summarize what you were looking for, Commission? Okay. Then that's it. That's all I have for sub item B, Chairwoman.
Sub item 5C, we touched upon
Yes.
it. Anything else that the two of you would like to add? And then I'll turn it over to the commissioners.
I don't have anything from my side. Doug, I think you're shaking your head no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else from the commissioners on agenda item number 5? Any questions for our mapping team? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in a few hours down the road in the afternoon. With that, we will move forward with agenda item number 6, discussion concerning a summary of recent litigation related to the Voting Rights Act. Roy, I know you are working on an update regarding Brenovich DNC. I don't know if there's anything to report today. You may be working on some reports down the road, but anything you'd like to add?
No, Madam Chair, I believe that we will have some additional information, additional presentation related to the Voting Rights Act, but I think it'll be next week. But certainly if the commissioners have any questions now about our presentation on the Brenovich case or anything else, we're happy to entertain those questions and answer them. But we do intend to come back next week with an additional presentation on the data target. And to be more specific, this is in response to Commissioner Watchman's request of this discussion related to Native American voting rights and the Voting Rights Act.
And any other questions the commissioners would like to suggest that our council research, please. But we look forward to an update next week on the Voting Rights Act. And if there's no further discussion on that agenda item, we will move to agenda item number 7, Executive Director's Report and discussion thereof. I will turn it over to Director Schmidt. I do want to make a mention that I would suggest that we move to vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for the purpose of obtaining legal advice to further implement and or advance these legal issues pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3, just to be able to discuss personnel hiring matters that may be confidential and private. And so with that, Commissioner Schmidt, please start and let me know if and when it makes sense to continue this conversation in executive session.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So first, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us for our public meetings. We've had a great turnout so far, and we really encourage folks to come out and let us know their thoughts. Or you can also, like Mark mentioned, go on our website at irc.az.gov/survey and fill out the Communities of Interest survey so that the Commission has that data and gets that input. In Pinal County, we had 95 people attend the meeting. We had 18 at our satellite location, and then 60 join online. In Glendale, we had 108 at our location, and then 26 join online. In Phoenix on Sunday, we had 54 in person and about 45 online. So it's been a good turnout. Looking forward to the rest of the tour. The travel schedule that's on the website is final, except for our Tucson location. We should have those up either today or tomorrow. And there was a bit of concern about some of the satellite locations that we were trying to add to the schedule. And Michelle is working on that. So I will let Michelle address those concerns.
Good morning, commissioners and listening public. Just to let you all know that I did get some phone calls about a few listening sessions that we had to take off of the schedule. Kayenta and Chin Lee. I had originally started working with a group of individuals about 3 or 4 weeks ago. One of the individuals is from the Navajo Nation Human Rights Office. And so in working with this group, they were to help find locations on the Navajo Nation, given the fact that, the Navajo Nation has pretty strict COVID guidelines. And so we had selected Chinle as one of the satellite locations, and Kayenta would be one of the satellite locations. Unfortunately, the locations, we received no confirmation from the locations. And so because of no confirmation from the locations, we had to remove them from the schedule. I'm still frantically working on a couple of additional satellite locations, given the comment that we received with an individual on the Navajo Nation. And one of the satellite locations that we're looking at and hoping to obtain is East Naspas, and then the other one would be again in Chinle, but not at the Chinle chapter house. So I'm still working very diligently and trying to confirm these locations. The other location that there was some concern about was the removing Gigotsmobi, which is on the Hopi Nation, off of the schedule. Again, I could not get confirmation on location for Gigotsmobi. That's what I have to share with you.
Thank you, Michelle. If there aren't any other questions on the schedule or the public hearings, there are some HR specific items that we do have to discuss in each session. So I will wait to discuss those to see if we go into each session.
Any other questions, comments on the substance aside from the personnel issues? And if not, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
I apologize for interrupting. It may be useful if you get the rest of the executive director's report that is not going to be related to the executive session done now. That way, when we come back, we can more quickly end the meeting. That's our suggestion. So Brian, I don't know if you wanted to hit the other items first.
That's all the update I have on the other items.
Okay, if there's no other further questions, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of obtaining legal advice to further implement and or advance these legal issues, ARS 38-431.0383. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Vice Chair Watchman moves to go into executive session.
Do I have a second?
Commissioner Meal seconds.
Any further discussion? Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York,
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, we will move into executive session. We'll give a full report to the public, and I do not expect this to be a significant time investment. We'll see you in executive session. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to public session. Thank you for the public for your patience. If we have, I believe we have our entire team intact. I see Michelle is there. And with that, I will turn it over to Director Schmidt just to summarize the conversation, and we'll move forward from there.
Thank you, Madam
Director
Chair.
Schmidt, please.
So Lori and I interviewed some great candidates for community outreach. It's going to be an integral position moving forward in the next 6 months. And we started to narrow it down, and we're thinking kind of about the timeline and moving forward. And we thought instead of the year that the job was advertised, maybe instead of the year that that job was advertised for, maybe we split it up and we see if individuals would be interested in doing, if 2 individuals would be interested in serving for the commission for 6 months. And we're working with HR right now to just get their sign off, make sure it's okay, and hopefully have them on board as soon as possible. And that's my update on that.
Thank you for your due diligence in the hiring process. I want to thank Commissioner Lerner also. I know you're particularly involved and all the commissioners for their oversight. With that, I will entertain a motion to move forward with the hiring of these 2 individuals for a 6-month slot, subject to HR approval.
This is Commissioner Meal. I so move.
Do I have a second?
This is Commissioner Lerner. I second.
Any further discussion? With that, we'll do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman.
Aye.
Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye, and with that, it is unanimously approved to move forward with these 2 hires for our community outreach position for 6 months, and we very much look forward to welcoming them to our team.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything else, Director Schmidt?
That is all I have for you all today.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 8, discussion of future agenda item requests. We have one on tap, which has to do with the Native American applications of the recent Supreme Court decision that our council is aware of. Any other additions to what we have otherwise discussed?
Well, I think, Madam Chair, we should also just disclose that we're also meeting with the Intertribal Council of Arizona later this week. I don't know if we've mentioned that, but we do have that scheduled for Friday, I believe. So
Yes.
maybe Brian can speak to that just so that the public knows that front.
Sure, absolutely. Chair Newberg and Vice Chair Watchman will be speaking to Intertribal Council Association Friday at about 9:30. Just give a brief introduction and presentation on our process.
And if there are other requests amongst the public, you know, please submit them to Executive Director Schmidt. We vet all requests, and we are available and interested in meeting with all different groups in our state to help us best understand, you know, the task ahead of us. Anything else? With that, we'll move to agenda item number 9, announcements. Outside of that presentation, I don't have any other further announcements except for, and Michelle, if you don't mind, because I don't have the details in front of me, we strongly encourage the public to come to our public hearings. We have, about 13 remaining in the next 2 weeks. our first one this afternoon coming up in Prescott. I believe it's in, can you please share, Michelle, where specifically the location is?
Yes, Madam Chair. The location is at the Prescott, I'm sorry, I probably would get in trouble for that. Yavapai College. And the address is 1110 East Sheldon in Prescott. And then we have satellite locations in Sedona. And the location for Sedona is the, oh, I don't have that in front of me. I do apologize. And then we have another satellite location at Congress Elementary School at 26400 and Tenderfoot Hill. That's in Congress, Arizona. And again, we do have the satellite location in Sedona for today.
Thank you. And then tomorrow, I believe, if I have my dates straight, we're going to be in Lake Havasu. After that, Flagstaff. So please, I really recommend everybody check out our website, find our traveling locations, and please, please engage. Any other announcements? With that, we'll move to agenda item number 10, next meeting date. In addition to the public hearings that we just emphasized, we look forward to meeting again for our public meeting, 8 a.m. next Tuesday, August 3rd. And with that, we will move to agenda item number 11, which is closing of public comments. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we move to agenda item number 12, which is adjournment. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Vice Chair Watchman.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Meal.
Okay. Quick vote. Vice Chair Watchman.
Aye.
Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, I thank you, our team, the public, for your ongoing commitment and involvement. I look forward to seeing many of you in Prescott tonight. And with that, goodbye, and we'll see you soon. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.